All right, evolution. So, this is going to be a few different lectures or video lectures, but it will all be in the same evolution notes packet. So, don't lose that thing. Okay, so like it says, have your notes packet out in front of you to follow along and fill in. All right, so here we go. So, Charles Darwin. Okay, everybody knows that name, I assume. He's the guy that's credited with coming up with the theory of evolution. Okay, you can see he lived in the 1800s. Very, very famous scientist simply because he's kind of created controversy with the whole evolution thing. Okay, he's credited with coming up with it. What it is, evolution, this is the definition, is the development of new organisms from pre-existing organisms over time. The big thing to remember here, pre-existing organisms. So Darwin is not talking about how life began. He's just talking about how life was already here, how it's developed. That's the big difference, and that's where a lot of people get all confused with evolution. Evolution is not creating or talking about how life came to be. He's not talking about the Big Bang Theory. He's not talking about how God created the heavens and the earth, the 7 days, all that kind of stuff. He's just simply talking, there's life here. How is it changing? All right, now Darwin, he actually initially studied to be a doctor, but he found lectures and all the surgery boring. And the surgery, I think that would be the funnest thing about being a doctor, being able to cut somebody open to look inside of them. I think that would be super interesting. Okay, so he got bored. He went to school to become a priest. And he read books about things called divine design. What that is, divine design, like meaning God. He read books about how God designed nature. That's the things he's talking about. Okay, that really interested him, so he wanted to contribute to that. Now, back then, okay, in the 17 and 1800s, scientists thought that species remained constant and unchanged. Okay, that's number 3 in your notes. They remained constant and unchanged. They're basically the same organisms and animals we see today have been here since the beginning of the earth. Now, they also believed that the earth was only thousands of years old. Okay, this is because if you take the Bible and just date it, just simply go like whose father and whose father and whose father is that and so on, just date it like chronologically, the earth is about 6,000 years old. And so that's what everybody thought. Okay, but a whole bunch of scientists were coming along, things were about to make a major change. So Darwin, he actually took a 5-year journey on what's called the HMS Beagle. It's a ship. Now, in the United States, we have like the USS Missouri and the USS Arizona and ships like that. It's called the United States Ship, USS. In Britain and England, they have the HMS. Kind of depending on the king or queen, it's either his or her Majesty's ship. So that's what he was on. You can see he started in Plymouth, England there, traveled all around the world. The Galapagos Islands is where we're going to focus on, where he did a lot of his stuff. So he was on that ship for 5 years. Now, he noticed that several species around the world resembled each other, but they also had small differences. Now, these guys here, these are called Darwin's finches, and they're a good example of a whole bunch of different types of evolution that we'll talk about later. These guys here, these are tortoises. These particular guys were on the Galapagos Islands. We'll bring those guys up later with those small differences. So again, they thought that the species resembled each other, but they had small differences. Now, based on what he observed over those 5 years, Darwin came up with a theory that that organisms can change or evolve over long periods of time. Now, this kind of is second nature, but back in the day, he's kind of the first guy to think of any of this. Okay, now remember, theories and hypotheses are continually changing or evolving. So a theory or a hypothesis of how we think life goes based on new evidence changes or it evolves. Okay, so now if the scientists thought that the earth was only thousands of years old, evolution's not going to work. Evolution takes thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds and millions of years to happen. So if the earth is only 6,000 years old, his theory is just done right from the get-go. But other scientists were working on the age of the earth. Their names are George Cuvier, Charles Lyell, and this might be one of my favorite scientists. His name is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. He just has like a cool name that just, rolls off the tongue really easily. All right, so now rock layers. So now in the 1800s, scientists in Europe began to study the rock layers or the strata. Now this is a really, really easy definition. This is number 6. What strata? Rock layers. That's all it is. Just simply 2 words. And you can see all the different layers over here. Okay? They found that the strata was laid over time, and therefore the lower strata, or the stuff on the bottom, is the oldest. This makes pretty good sense because we're obviously up on top, standing on the youngest ground. As we go down, it gets older. Pretty straightforward. Okay? Now, Georges Cuvier, what he did, he studied fossils. He was a French anatomist. He studied fossils in the strata or in the rock layers. So now he noticed that the fossils that he found looked different than the species of his day, but that the older fossils, or if he dug farther down in the strata, farther down, he found older fossils, they looked a lot different. So if he dug down, 20 feet, he found something that, kind of resembled a dog. But then if he dug down, 100 feet, he'd found like a T-Rex, which they had never seen before. That's the thing he started noticing. So he also noticed that there were sudden changes to the types of fossils from one strata to the next. So if we go back to this one, basically if you're right here, you got like the pterodactyls and stuff like that, and a buffalo or whatever. Then the next strata, you got like the humpback whale. That's what he's talking about. From one rock layer to the next, all of a sudden there was just a huge change in the type of animals that there were. Now he came up with the idea of what's called catastrophism, like a catastrophe, catastrophism. Okay, what that is, the idea that geologic catastrophes, and we're talking here like big massive earthquakes, or like a meteor hitting the earth, or a massive tsunami, or a massive hurricane. Those are the geologic catastrophes. Those guys wiped out large groups of organisms at once, like we think what happened with the dinosaurs. Big meteor hit, a whole bunch of dinosaurs, they all died at the same time. Now, next guy, his name is Charles Lyell, and I'm really, really jealous of his sweet sideburns that he's got there. Okay, you can see where he lived, or when he lived, early or the late 1800s into the 1800s. So he was an English geologist who shared some of Cuvier's thoughts. Okay, but he thought it happened more uniformly. So instead of Cuvier thinking that there was this big, massive event that changed everything, he just thought it happened uniformly, or kind of slowly but surely over time. And he called his idea uniformitarianism, or it happens more uniformly, so uniformitarianism, slowly but surely. Now what it is, this is number 11, or I'm sorry, number 12. What uniformitarianism is? The assumption that what has happened in the past is still happening today. Now, Darwin read a lot of Lyell's work. Remember, he had 5 years on that boat, so he's got a lot of time to read. So he read a lot of Lyell's work, and he agreed with his thoughts about the continual change was occurring. So he agreed that kind of the slowly but surely was going on. And in Darwin's book, he actually refers to Lyell's work a whole bunch because they both agree with that slowly but surely mentality. Now, favorite scientist, that sweet dude right there, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Okay, just a sweet dude. Okay, Lamarck also agreed with Lyell about there being that constant change, again, kind of slowly but surely. He theorized what he titled the inheritance of acquired characteristics. Okay, this is basically the theory that an organism could pass on an acquired characteristic that it had developed over its lifetime to its offspring. His theory basically was if a cheetah is getting faster over his lifetime, his kids will then be fast. Basically, if you learn something, you can pass it on to your kids. Okay, which, if you think about it on the surface, kind of makes sense. And Darwin initially accepted this theory, but then rejected it like the rest of the scientific community. Now, this is a really important thing. Think about it. In a very broad or a very basic sense, it works, like I was talking about with the cheetah. But let's say that like LeBron, he's incredible at basketball. Are his kids going to be amazing at basketball right when they are born? Of course not. They still have to learn. So you can't really pass on anything that you learn to your kids. They still have to learn it just like everybody else does. Okay, and that's summarize that in for number 15. Why doesn't that work? Summarize that. We'll talk about LeBron's kids or something. Now, getting back to Darwin. Okay, we got kind of sidetracked with those three scientists, but getting back to Darwin. Okay, so he read the work from Cuvier, Lyell, and Lamarck on his 5-year journey. Then he took his observations and began to form a theory of how animals came to be. So he's basically taking all their information and kind of combining it together to call it evolution. Okay, and this obviously becomes a very, very, very popular slash controversial topic, and people still are debating this stuff. Okay, now the theory of evolution. Darwin published a book called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Now, this is number 16. And if you ever need something to help you fall asleep at night, try and read this. This book is horribly boring. I had to read it in college, and oh, Lord. All right, so in his book, he had 2 goals. First one, present the large amount of evidence that evolution does occur. Or basically, he's trying to convince everybody, look, I'm not just making this up. I got a bunch of evolution to help me and kind of give me reason why I'm thinking what it's thinking. Then he wanted to explain the variety and distribution of organisms on the earth, or why the organisms looked so different, but also so similar all over the globe. Now, evolution, like I was talking about in the very, very, very beginning, is the development of new organisms from pre-existing organisms over time. Okay. Now, theories and hypotheses can change as new evidence arises. That's very, very important. Okay. Now, on the origin of species, he used the phrase what's called descent with modification. Now, this is number 17. What phrase did he use? Descent with modification to describe the process of evolution. Okay. He proposed that all species had descended from one or a few original kinds of life. Now, again, he's not talking about where life came from. He's just talking about there's one or a few animals or things of life in the world, and everything evolved from them. Now, this is number 18. Darwin was the first to propose that all species, living and extinct, had descended from a pre-existing species. Now, this picture, it's a very, very, very common picture. You know, you're going from a monkey to a chimp to an ape and then eventually a human. This is completely wrong. And we'll talk about that later on, but this is a completely inaccurate picture, but it's very, very, very familiar, and that's why I got to put it on there. But I'll talk about how relationships between monkeys and humans, like how this can basically get misinterpreted, is what it is. Now, Darwin used the finches. Now, in the very beginning, we talked about Darwin's finches. These are the guys we're talking about here. So he used finches as one of the evidence or pieces of evidence that he observed as one of his examples. Okay, so you basically can see on one side, you got a finch that eats fruit, then you got the guys that eat insects, then you got a cactus eater, then you got a seed eater. And you can tell mainly the difference. Their head shape and size is a little bit different, but the beak shape and size, this is what really defines these guys, is the beak between them all. Now, did the scientific community and the general population accept his ideas? This is number 20? No way. People mainly believe in creationism, so they thought, God created the world within 7 days. So his idea was considered radical. He actually got kicked out of the church because of his ideas, because he thought he was a heretic and going against God and stuff like that. Now, stop here. This is the end of the first page of notes. There'll be another page, or there'll be another lecture to go through more of it. Now, keep that packet with you. We're going to go through that same packet a bunch of times. But for now, this is the end of this video about the first page of evolution.